behind the loud engines and million-dollar deals at Gas Monkey Garage was a world of pure chaos. And only one person saw it all. Christie Brimberry was the office manager, but her real job was being the zookeeper. She was paid to manage a group of wild personalities. For years, she stayed silent. But now, the truth is coming out about the 5 people who pushed her to the edge. Tom Smith. In a garage full of big personalities, Tom Smith was in a league of his own. He was not just loud, he was a storm of energy that Christie Brimberry had to contain every single day. One of her main jobs, as she once said, was just dealing with Tom. He was so hyperactive that she constantly had to remind him he was inside and needed to use a quieter voice, or just leave the room. It was like managing a child in a high-stakes workshop where one mistake could cost thousands of dollars. Christie even joked that in a fight between Tom and an elderly ape, Tom would win because he would just talk so much the ape would run away. It was a funny line, but it pointed to a serious problem. Tom's energy was a constant drain, a distraction that pulled Christie away from her real work of managing the business, the schedules, and the money. Christie came from a world of hard work. She learned her work ethic from her father, who ran an old-style meat market his whole life. She knew what it meant to run a business seriously. But Tom treated Gas Monkey Garage like a playground. His constant need for attention was more than just annoying. It was unprofessional. For Christie, who was trying to keep the garage running like a well-oiled machine, Tom was a wrench thrown into the gears every single day. She was the one who had to keep everything on track, balancing project costs and tight deadlines, a skill she learned from raising her 6 children. Tom's behavior made that job nearly impossible. But all that daily frustration boiled over into something much worse. It led to a moment of such disrespect that it ultimately ended his career at Gas Monkey. The incident involved Richard Rawlings' personal Rolls-Royce, one of his most prized possessions. A fan who had cystic fibrosis came to the garage, hoping to see the amazing cars and maybe get a picture. Tom Smith and another mechanic, Jordan Butler, let the fan get close to the Rolls-Royce for a photo. When Richard found out, he was furious. He reportedly yelled at the fan, using terrible language to order him away from the car. A manager stepped in and confronted Tom and Jordan for allowing it to happen. Instead of understanding the seriousness of the situation, they were insubordinate. They told the manager to chill out in a very rude way. A few hours later, after a heated confrontation, Richard fired them both on the spot. For Christie, this was the ultimate betrayal. Her job was to protect the Gas Monkey brand and its public image. An incident involving a sick fan and the owner's prized car was a public relations disaster. It made the garage look cruel and unprofessional. Tom's carelessness created a mess that Christie had to clean up. It showed a complete lack of respect for the business she worked so hard to build. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. From that day on, Tom Smith was not just the annoying guy in the shop. He was the man who put his own foolish choices above the reputation of the entire garage. And for the woman who served as its guardian, that was something she would never forgive. The chaos of Tom Smith was finally gone, but his firing left a gap in the shop. Little did Christie know, a much bigger problem was brewing. The most important person in the entire garage, the genius who made everything possible, was about to cause a crisis that would shake Gas Monkey to its core. Aaron Kaufman. Aaron Kaufman was known as the Bearded Wonder, and for good reason. He was the master mechanic, the quiet genius who could turn a pile of rust into a work of art. He was, as Richard Rawlings himself admitted, the nucleus of Gas Monkey Garage. For years, he and Richard were a team, building an empire together. But behind the scenes, the pressure of fame was taking its toll. The garage had become a TV set, and the deadlines were no longer about building great cars. They were about making great television. Aaron grew tired of it all. He wanted to work on bigger, more complicated projects, the kind of builds that took months, not weeks. The TV show needed quick flips, cars that could be finished in time for the next episode. This creative difference became a huge problem. Aaron felt like his talent was being wasted on small, repetitive jobs. He felt buried under the stress of cameras, sponsors, and impossible deadlines. So in 2017, he made a decision that stunned the car world. He walked away from Gas Monkey Garage. To the public, it looked like an artist choosing his craft over fame. Aaron said he left to save himself, to protect the part of him that still loved the smell of grease and the roar of an engine. But for Christie Brimberry, his departure was not a noble act. It was an abandonment. It was a selfish decision that threw the entire operation into chaos and landed the mess squarely on her desk. Suddenly, the garage was without its lead mechanic. The man who was the heart of every build was gone. Richard Rawlings admitted that Aaron's departure came completely out of left field, and that moving forward without his talents would be a painstaking process. That painstaking process was Christie's new reality. She was the one who had to manage the schedules, the parts orders, and the workflow of a garage that had just lost its most important member. The scramble to fill the void was immediate. They brought in a restoration expert named Jason Aker to oversee a couple of big projects. He was only supposed to be there temporarily, but after Aaron left, he was asked to stay on permanently as the new shop foreman. This showed just how unprepared they were for Aaron's exit. It created a massive logistical and morale crisis. For Christie, this was a profound frustration. Aaron talked about personal and professional differences of opinion, hinting at bad blood behind the scenes. But whatever his reasons, the result was the same. He chose his own creative freedom over the stability of the team he helped build. He left everyone else to deal with the fallout. While fans mourned the loss of their favorite mechanic, Christie had to manage the reality of his absence. She had to keep the business running while its very foundation had been ripped out. Aaron Kaufman may have been a genius with cars, but in Christie's eyes, he was the man who walked away when his family needed him most, leaving her to pick up the pieces. Dealing with the fallout from a star employee quitting was one thing. But soon, Christie would have to watch another key player leave for reasons that felt like a slap in the face, especially given the personal battle she was about to begin. Casey Matthew. Casey Matthew was the master painter, the quiet artist who gave Gas Monkey's creations their soul. His work was flawless, and his calm attitude was a welcome relief in a shop filled with loud personalities. But the life of a reality TV star was not for him. By 2015, after years on the show, the constant attention had started to wear him down. Fans would line up outside the shop, and if he tried to go out for lunch, he would be mobbed. The pressure of filming and the lack of privacy got old. So Casey made a choice. He decided to step away from Fast and Loud to go back to what he loved most, running his own paint shop and spending more time with his family. He didn't leave because of drama or a big fight. He left for his own peace of mind. He chose a quiet life over the fame and fortune of television. On the surface, it was an admirable decision, one that many people respected. But for Christie Brimberry, the timing of his departure was a source of deep, unspoken frustration. Casey left in 2015 because the pressure of the show was too much to handle. Just a few months later, in October 2016, Christie's world was turned upside down. She was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. While Casey was enjoying the peace of his own shop, Christie was preparing for the fight of her life. She had to undergo chemotherapy and then a life-altering surgery to remove a cancerous lymph node. The procedure was difficult. A nerve to her larynx was cut, and she was left with no voice for a long time. She had a tube in her throat and faced a recovery that could take up to 6 months. All of this was happening while she was still a mother to 6 children and a manager at one of the busiest and most chaotic garages on television. Think about that for a moment. Casey Mathieu walked away from the job because the stress of being famous was too much. At the same time, Christie was facing a life-threatening illness, the ultimate stress, yet she had no choice but to keep going. She couldn't just quit. She had a family to support and a business that depended on her. She fought through the pain, the fear, and the silence, and eventually returned to the spotlight stronger than ever. Her strength was incredible, but watching a key team member leave because the job was too hard must have been infuriating. Casey had the luxury of choosing a quieter life. It was a choice Christie didn't have. He got to escape the very chaos she had to endure while also battling cancer. His departure wasn't just an employee leaving. It was a stark reminder of the immense burden she carried, often alone. He chose peace while she was left to fight a war on 2 fronts, one for her health and one for the garage he left behind. As if dealing with internal departures wasn't enough, a new threat emerged from former employees. This time, they weren't just leaving, they were starting a rival shop right under Christie's nose, creating a public circus that threatened to tarnish the Gas Monkey name. Scott McMillan. When an employee leaves, it creates problems. But when they join a direct competitor, it feels like a betrayal. That is exactly what Scott McMillan did. Scott was a former mechanic at Gas Monkey Garage, but after he left, he didn't just disappear. He teamed up with the 2 mechanics Richard had fired, Tom Smith and Jordan Butler, to start a new shop called Fired Up Garage. This new shop became the focus of a spin-off show, Misfit Garage. The entire point of Misfit Garage was to compete with Gas Monkey. The show was built on the idea that these misfits could build cars just as good as Richard's crew, proving that money wasn't everything. This created a public feud between the 2 garages. On television, it looked like a bitter rivalry, with Richard often showing up to taunt his former employees. For Christie Brimberry, this was a nightmare. A huge part of her job was managing the Gas Monkey brand and making sure it was seen as an elite, world-class operation. Now there was a TV show dedicated to a tacky, dramatic rivalry starring their own ex-employees. Scott McMillan wasn't just working somewhere else. He was actively participating in a public spectacle that was directly tied to Gas Monkey. The truth behind the scenes was even more frustrating. The feud was mostly fake. Richard Rawlings was actually the landlord for the Fired Up Garage building, and he was also an executive producer on Misfit Garage. He was making money off the very rivalry that was causing Christie headaches. But the public didn't know that. All they saw was the drama. Misfit Garage was just as chaotic as Gas Monkey, if not more so. The shop was constantly losing staff, and there was endless fighting and arguing. In fact, Scott McMillan himself eventually quit Misfit Garage because he got sick of all the fussing, the very same reason many people left Gas Monkey. He left one circus only to join another, and then he left that one too. For Christie, Scott McMillan and the Misfit Garage crew were a constant source of frustration. They were a cheap imitation that diluted the brand she worked so hard to build. They turned the craft of car building into petty reality TV drama. Every time they created a new fake fight or a new ridiculous storyline, it reflected back on Gas Monkey. Scott chose to be a part of that circus. He profited from a drama that Christie had to manage the negative consequences of. He wasn't just an ex-employee. He was a traitor who helped create a public embarrassment she had to face every day. Tom, Aaron, Casey, Scott. They were all sources of immense frustration for Christie, but as she managed each crisis, a bigger truth became clear. All these problems, all this chaos, all pointed back to one single person. The biggest problem in the garage was not one of the monkeys. It was the ringmaster himself. Richard Rawlings. For years, Christie Brimberry worked to bring order to the chaos of Gas Monkey Garage. She managed the wild mechanics, the impossible deadlines, and the constant pressure of a hit TV show. But the truth is, every fire she put out was started by the same person, her boss, Richard Rawlings. He was the architect of the success, but he was also the source of all the dysfunction. The person who caused Christie the most grief was the very man who signed her paychecks. It was Richard's sometimes caustic personality that set the tone for the entire garage. He was the one who was never far from controversy, the one who had fallouts with his staff so often that they would find themselves run out of the garage. Former associates have called him an asshat, who fosters a culture of entitlement. He created the very environment that Christie was hired to control. Her job as zookeeper wasn't just about the employees. It was about managing the unpredictable and demanding ringmaster at the center of it all. Think about the other names on this list. Tom Smith was a chaotic employee, but it was Richard's explosive reaction during the Rolls-Royce incident that turned a mistake into a crisis. He was the one who allegedly screamed at a sick fan, creating a public relations nightmare that Christie had to deal with. Richard created a world where drama was good for television, and Tom was just a character in his show. Aaron Kaufman, the brilliant mechanic, left because he was burned out by the relentless TV deadlines and the lack of creative freedom. Who set those deadlines? Richard. Who prioritized the brand and the show over the art of the build? Richard. His hands-on management style and his focus on expanding his empire created the high-pressure environment that drove his best mechanic away. Even the misfit garage rivalry was Richard's creation. He owned the building they worked in and was a producer on their show. He manufactured the drama with Scott McMillan and the others because it was good for business. But it created a tacky, unprofessional image that undermined the elite brand Christie was trying to protect. Every problem traced back to him. Christie's job was an impossible one. She was hired to clean up the messes made by the very person who saw messes as a good business strategy. Her loyalty and professionalism were tested every single day. She had to survive not just the chaos of the garage, but the personality of the man who ruled it. While Richard was out making deals and becoming a star, Christie was back at the office, holding everything together. She was the one ensuring that his empire didn't crumble from the inside out. The other four men on this list were just symptoms of the real problem. The true source of her frustration was Richard Rawlings himself. While the world watched the flashy cars and the loud drama, Christie Brimberry was the silent force holding Gas Monkey Garage together. Her calm and professional attitude hid a deep frustration with the very people who made the show a hit. She was the one who truly kept the wheels turning, managing the chaos while fighting her own personal battles with courage and grace. She proved she was tougher than any challenge, emerging as the true, unsung hero of the garage.